Hello,
Hello,
Balbert.
Bowerbirders.
Hello, Ben.
Hi, Nick. How you going?
Good. So we are talking about exclusives in the design and architecture publishing world today. And this is going to be a great episode, I suspect,
I think I heard
from all the
someone. I think
comments.
someone publicly on LinkedIn was like, "That's going to be a belter,"
We're
um,
gonna,
which
we
which is interesting.
If you're wondering what you have tuned into, this is the Bowerbird Show. We are the founders of Bowerbird, which is a online tool that helps a lot of the content move between architects, designers, publishers, magazines, and journalists. And we sort of unpack these really niche topics around publishing in the design sphere.
Yep. And the reason you should listen to us is we've been doing this for a long time now. But even before we were doing this, you were an architect turned architectural photographer. I am a journalist by trade. Once a journalist, always a journalist. So yeah, you can trust us.
And if you enjoy these videos, please give them a thumbs up. They really help with the algorithm and encourages us to go and make more of these videos.
As if we're going to stop. You can't stop us.
So this all started a week ago. We posted a stat on LinkedIn that said that journalists respond to submissions 62% more if they know it's an exclusive. And we know this because being a Bowerbird, we have lots of data and we've just introduced an exclusivity tool. So we were looking at the stats, trying to figure out, is this a good tool? Are people enjoying it? And 62% is really, really high. In the world of like testing things, you might be going, wow, that's a 5% difference when you change something. This is a really big difference.
Yeah, it's essentially it triggered us to go back to a conversation we've been having since the beginning of time around exclusives. And I think we're now at this point where we want to ask everyone else what they think about things rather than just sort of giving an opinionated point of view. So yeah, what you jumped onto LinkedIn and said, so what does
Well,
everyone think about exclusives?
Well, I just posted that stat, and then Amy Edwards jumped in, and she had a range of really good practical questions around exclusives. So we are going to go through those, Amy, but we wanted to start off with some of the juicy, saucy comments because over the last week, our DMs have just been bombarded,
Melting.
melting. It's like people needed somewhere to vent or to tell their story and they couldn't leave comments. So we've been having a lot of chats behind the scenes. We're not going to name anybody. We always try to keep everybody out of the limelight if they don't want to have their name mentioned. But we find this is where you find the real truth of how people feel about these things. And now we get to share them all with you.
So I guess first things first, what is an exclusive? Because there may be people tuning in who don't understand that, which is totally fair.
So, an exclusive is when a publication says, we want to publish your work, but you can't publish anywhere else for a period of time. Like, that's the simple idea of an exclusive. But you might have more complex exclusives, which say you just can't get published in our competitors or in these particular places. But the
Or
basic,
or there's content that we can publish and other people can't, or other people can publish and we can't, whatever it is. Yeah, so there's lots. Yeah, you're right. There's lots of complexity there. The other thing around exclusives, which is a really important thing to note, is that sometimes exclusives will end at different times. So sometimes it will be as soon as a project, for example, is published, then it's free to be distributed elsewhere. Other publications will say you have to wait 6 months or a certain amount of time after the publication has gone out in order to publish somewhere else.
and exclusives tended to be the world of print magazines. And then that all got turned upside down with online media because people wanted to use Instagram and there's all number of websites around the world that want to publish content. So the game was changing. And so there's this clash of these two worlds and they both still exist. And that's where you end up with all this tension, which is why you have people who love them, who hate them. Some people see them as a necessity. Some people just really, really despise them. It's
We
it's
see
fascinating.
You see, I can go on the record as a journalist who was in this position, and I can tell you what frustrated me to start with.
Yeah.
When I worked at InDesign Media, we had InDesign Live that I was running. Basically, someone would submit a project to InDesign Magazine. InDesign Magazine would go, great, we're going to publish this. I wasn't able to then publish that newsworthy story for a certain amount of time. So that's just an internal tension that happens even within publications, within publishers, where you can't get access to a story because another one of your titles is using it. So I used to find that semi frustrating. You get over it pretty quickly as an editor. But when you look at the wider world, there's so many publications and so many people trying to get exclusive content. I think that's the important part. They're looking for content that no one else has, and there's a business reason for that, right?
Well, absolutely. So we'll probably delve into all of the behind the scenes aspects because we've just come out of 2 weeks with meeting with journalists and publishers in Melbourne. So we've had a lot of conversations. We're sitting in people's offices and they're telling us, I guess, a part of the industry that most people don't see. And so we're going to try and have a balanced discussion around exclusives, and then we might even realm into the world of products and advertising. Because once you start to see the full ecosystem, it makes a lot more sense. Whether or not you like exclusives or not, that'll be your decision. But there's a reason why they exist. Where I really want to start is I want to start with a really juicy message that I got, which I've taken out everybody's names, but
Names and voices have been changed to protect the innocent.
so it's just a ball ache for all involved. Architects, small to mid-sized firms, spend years on a project. It comes to fruition. It's going to be the cornerstone of their marketing. Then they score a spot, and then the nasty exclusivity requirements rears its ugly head. And boom, they have to wait for 6 months plus to get it published when what they really needed was to push the project through all manner of media to jolt their incoming client inquiries, profile, marketing, etc. I get it, but it's very annoying! Exclamation mark. I actually think that the less pedantic but still quality online platforms are a better marketing tool for architects than the discreet printed pubs, which aren't read as widely. I've also had nasty editors who shall remain nameless have a go when they think I'm in their exclusivity territory. I just thought that was fascinating. Really anchors
Yeah.
the emotion of this issue.
Yeah. It was interesting that we got such passionate feedback from people. So just sort of to break that down, really there's a few things going on in that particular response, which is you've got the tension between what I would say is value. So that's the value of an exclusive. So there's always been this question mark, I think, around is it worth me, for example, tying up a project for 6, 12, 18 months with a publication in order to get the value from that. So that's what you're always talking about. I think one of the really interesting things when you compare print and online, which may be it's a related topic, but it might be a totally separate discussion for us to have. But one of the interesting things is assessing value. And I don't think you need to be opinionated about that. You just need to go, what is the value? Understand the value of a print publication versus online. The reality is, most print publications want some level of exclusivity or newness to it. Most online publications will publish, almost anything. But there are online publications that require an exclusive as well. I think Yellow Trace is one example of a website that requires exclusivity. So it's really just going, what's the value of that publication's audience to you, or what's the value of that particular publication to you in your practice? And then you're doing a trade-off. It's a business decision ultimately.
Absolutely. And I think that comment comes from smaller architects who have one single project which is publishable. And so all their eggs are in one basket. So when they get tied up with an exclusive, they're doing that at the detriment of online media. And there's a real tension between these two worlds. If, however, you were an architect and you had 2, 3, 4, 5 projects, you having an exclusive is not necessarily going to ruin your marketing approach. It means you can go out with another project, you can run through the interwebs, and you can have the exclusive as well. Our experience has always been Traditionally, that was the hard bit for architects to manage when they're small. The idea that you could do an exclusive and then you could go out to the wider world, because there was a little bit of psychology there where architects would do the exclusive and then they're tired of that project. They're tired of waiting. They've got new projects coming through the pipeline. And so they switch. And so
Mm.
the total audience that sees that really awesome project that got the exclusive ends up being diminished. So that's the landscape. But we probably haven't really unpacked what the value of print really is, because there is value there.
I think there's this comparison of print and online as though they're two different forms of the same thing. But I'd say that there's a couple of really clear, huge benefits to print. One of them is that the vast majority of print publications will get an editor or writer to go and interview the architect. It will be all original content. If they're doing their job well, all original content. They'll get quotes from the clients. They will visit the site. There's a lot of investment there. And really, that's where exclusives come from. So I remember years ago, Marcus Piper, some people may know him, but he's a graphic designer, and he wrote an article about this, that the reason exclusives started was that a publication would invest a lot of money into the production of the content. So back in those days, all publications, or the vast majority of publications, were taking original photography. So they were paying a couple of $1,000s to get a photographer to go out and photograph and, get the clients and do all that coordination of the production. And so essentially, if you were putting a project out there where you'd invested thousands of dollars to get this content together, and then all of a sudden it gets published somewhere else, ultimately those publications would go, it's not fresh anymore. And so we've just wasted thousands of dollars. So there was a real legitimate business reason for why they wanted to protect that content.
Yeah, so there's a real reason there, because they're putting a lot of time and effort into creating the content and
Yeah.
they're going above and beyond.
But I think where a lot of people, and I think this was Marcus's point at the time, was if that's changed, if now all you're doing is potentially paying a writer, you know, $500, etc., for an article, your investment then, if the images are being provided by the architect, your investment's a lot lower. So the exchange of value, or the locked value within that content, is not as high. But what I would say is it is still there. So to say, oh well, they're not paying for content anymore. They are. This is the thing. Print publications will be paying maybe $1,000, different currencies, different places, but $1,000 for an article. That's an investment, and it's an upfront investment for them to get that writer, a professional writer, to go out, get all that information, do the story, and find the unique angle for that publication as well. So I think that, to me, is the bit that still really rings true. The publication is investing a lot upfront in unique content. And so protecting the value of that content makes perfect sense to me.
They've also got the risk of printing. So they're locking in all of this content, and it's just a timeline which takes a while to get all of the magazines or books printed, wherever they come from in the world. You've got to go through this long process, and you don't want all of these projects to be stale by the time that you've spent, tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars creating that next edition. There's a true risk there from a business perspective. And I guess what's shifted is the risk has been moved onto the architect or the designer, who is now photographing or, creating more of that content. So there's probably a bit of tension between those two, trying to balance out, when does this make sense or when does this not make sense from the architect's perspective.
Yeah, and so that's the sort of production value, I suppose, of sort of a bit of a background of why exclusives exist. But why are they still relevant, I guess? Or sorry, let's put it another way. What's the value for the architect of going into print rather than online, and vice versa, potentially?
I think an interesting way of answering that is to understand why product advertisers want to be in print, which is a bit of a roundabout answer to this. Uh, because we've been talking to publishers and we talked to some product suppliers in the last couple of weeks, there was a few light bulb moments there where the product suppliers were saying the reason they still use print is because of the brand reputation that print magazines deliver. And they know that a product supplier might spend 50 to 80% of their ad budget on online ads on Instagram, Google, and these places, and they still come back to print as the anchor of how they position their brand. And in my mind, that's similar to what an architect could do as well. Is you're thinking about the exclusivity as the anchor of your brand, where you have somebody else who's validating what you do and lifting you up, and then you use online to really get out to the world and gain like a larger audience.
Sort of a light bulb going off in my mind there. It's that print is harder. Everything about it is harder. Like you've said, it's slower. They invest more time and money. There's an editorial team. There's a lot more that goes into print. And also, there's a limited inventory, if you want to look at it that way. There's only a certain number of pages compared to a website, which could potentially be infinite. So the value is in how hard it is to produce and therefore how much value there is in the limited number of slots that are in there. We've used this analogy before where it's like winning an award. If you're getting into a print publication, there may be, 4 slots, 4 project features per issue, and then maybe you've got a quarterly magazine. So you've got these 16 opportunities in a year, and you're talking about submissions to these. Some of these publications are thousands in a year, thousands of publishable projects that don't go through, that don't ever get published in that print publication. So I think it is the scarcity of the thing and how hard it is to produce. That's where the value lies in a large way.
Absolutely. The other thing I picked up on from the product suppliers, there was a couple comments there saying everything out there looks the same. So there was a period where print was looking the same, and they were saying, like, historically, there was a period where print was really boring. Everything was identical. And then the online world popped up, and there were people playing with different things. And now we've sort of moved where the online is looking very similar. People are coming back to print, where we've got publishers releasing new print publications to stand out and create a unique style, character. There's something where you're trying to get away from everything looking exactly the same.
I think that the really interesting thing in this whole saga of exclusives is it's really easy to forget the audience. So every publication is going to have its own audience, and you kind of have to trust that the publication knows its audience better than you know the audience. But they are doing everything in service of the audience, and you go, well, why is that? They're not doing it in service of the architects or the advertisers, which are generally product suppliers. They're trying to deliver something to their audience. You go, why? Because if they lose their audience, there's no value to the architect, there's no value to the advertiser. So they know what their audience wants, and generally the audience wants fresh content. They want to feel like that, that magazine or that publication is, on the cutting edge of their particular community.
Yeah, the way I was thinking of the architects in print now is they're almost like brand ambassadors. So print is looking for who is going to be their brand ambassadors, which they then take to product suppliers to connect these two sides, which is a bit nobody ever talks about. Nobody really talks about the money that funds all of these publications and how you afford to print, sometimes thousands of copies. But there really is there is a select number of slots in a print magazine, and they need to choose the architect who has the quality of the work, but there's, I guess, brand credentials or the status within a city or a country to give that magazine the value that it then sells on to product suppliers and third parties. So it's, as an architect, I think there is value in being part of that circle. Like, you may be thinking somebody else is advertising against me, but it works in both directions because you get pulled back into the print magazine to be lifted up again because of the same reason you got there in the first place. So
And it's an ecosystem.
it's an ecosystem.
It really is a symbiotic relationship. And I think if you can't see all of the angles of it, it's easy to think that someone's being exploited in that process. And I think people are naturally predisposed to feeling like they're the ones being exploited. But once you understand the full system, you can kind of see how all of the parts fit together. And, anyone who's sort of paying any attention will know that advertising sales have dropped because print is so much harder to produce. It means that everything's getting harder. So the sales teams are dropping, the editorial teams are dropping. Like, it is a hard time to be a publisher at the moment. And when you see new print publications launching, that's going against the tide. Those are the little salmons swimming upstream. And again, that a lot of that is around branding and building a community rather than just like making money off a print publication.
Yeah, I also suspect inside that ecosystem, so you've got the magazines, then you've got all the product suppliers, and we picked up on this, but there's a lot of print publications in showrooms now.
Mm.
And I suspect the architects inside those magazines are getting mentions from those product suppliers because they're trying to reinforce each other's brand to say, this is high quality design. So this architect is amazing. And guess what? Happens to be the architect has been featured in a book that's just happening to be sat on their coffee table in that showroom. Look at that. Oh my God, they chose our product. There's a there is a system there where everyone's talking about the same thing and they need to have something that's different to just an endless Instagram feed. They need to be able to talk about people and what they do, and you can't talk about everybody. So I think that's what's happening at a city-based level, and that's why you would probably choose the exclusive route if it was the right audience.
Well, that's it. It's like the exclusive is essentially the arrangement that is the cost of entries. It's the price of entry. So if you want to be associated with that particular publication, the price of entry may be that you can't publish that anywhere else for 6 months, right? And again, you just have to make that decision ultimately. Do I want to be a part of that cohort? And is their audience worth that to me?
So coming back to the problem that a lot of architects had, which was they would sign up for an exclusive. Now they're locked out. They can't put anything on social media. They can't go online. The exclusive gets pushed out. It's delayed. It was going to be 6 months. Now it's 8 months. Eventually it comes out into print. Now you've got to wait a couple months until it's off the newsstands. The architect forgets about it and they move on. This is what we used to say. And we've sort of changed this a little bit because having worked on the exclusive tool and combined with autopilot on Bowerbird now, we realized you could do both. So that's why we ended up building there's a recipe in autopilot now that will look for exclusives and that allows people to choose a date. It locks the kit, prevents anybody from downloading the content, keeps that arrangement nice and neat. But when it comes out of exclusive, then it automatically goes out. And that was that light bulb moment where we said you can have both and you're not
Online.
reliant on the psychology of the architect still being excited about that project.
And really, we're just talking about squeezing as much value out of your investment as possible. I think this is the other thing that I think is interesting because we sort of get to talk to both sides and understand the dynamics. I think the feedback from architects is often, I've invested a lot in this content, which is 100% true. Thousands of dollars on a photo shoot. You've maybe, spent time writing the information yourself, whatever it is. You've spent a lot of time on putting that content together, but it just pales into insignificance when you consider the costs associated with producing something like a print magazine. We've always said, look, if whatever you're paying your photographer, it's not enough. And we've talked to architects who pay, 10, 15,000 for a photo shoot, and we would still say that's not enough. And the reason is that it's so valuable to you as your business. All other businesses out there understand the value of marketing to the point where you're talking about like 25% of your revenue going back, or your budget in a year, 25, maybe even more, that's going into that. And I think, architecture is such a different thing. It's a lot slower, but I think the reality is even if you're kind of like, oh, we're investing a lot in creating this content for the publication, that publication spends all their time, money, energy building an audience and building a publication. So just remember that that is a very expensive exercise.
Well, and be happy that there's an ecosystem built around what you do and you don't really have to pay much for it. To give you a comparison, you can get a photo shoot done probably for 1,500, maybe add a little bit extra for inflation, but we're not talking about a lot of money there. And then if that project is publishable, it can flow all over the world. You go talk to a product supplier and they're saying things like, oh, yeah, we're talking to a magazine and like $10,000, that's not going to get us anything. Like it's so like it's not even enough to start the conversation moving about getting into the magazine because they're talking about spending $50,000 or $500,000 when
With
they're
one publication or one publisher, not even like not even doing all your marketing for the year is not $50,000. Yeah.
Yeah. So the way I look at it now is I go, you may not want to have an exclusive. You got to choose when that works for you. But be appreciative that there's all of these publishers who tend to be quite small. That's the other thing we've figured out. These are not massive organizations. They tend to be quite niche. They might be 5, 10 people who are working really hard to create this piece of paper, which is in the real world. And then they send it out to all of their subscribers or wherever it goes in the world.
That's something that architects should appreciate better than anyone else. It's the output always looks larger than the number of, than the input. So the number of people working in your practice, you might be finishing 4 projects a year. A house or a building, there's so much that goes into it. So architects are always punching above their weight when you think about output versus input. Publishers are exactly the same. In fact, print publishers, the process of producing a physical print magazine has a lot of parallels to creating a physical building or space.
Yeah, I think a little tip here, a bit of a segue, and this may turn into an entire episode of its own, is as an architect, make sure you list as many products as you can, products and materials, especially if you want to do exclusives, because that's the triangle behind the scenes where it's print publications who are trying to find really amazing buildings and match that up with really amazing product suppliers. That's what funds all of that, but there's a really tight ecosystem that's happening. You want that product supplier to be talking about your architecture when somebody goes into their showroom, because it's word of mouth, but it's being triggered because of that. I can hold a bit of paper up in my hand and there's something there. Oh, let me show you this.
I can hear perhaps some of the old school architects screaming at YouTube right now saying, I can't endorse a product because the guidelines say that I'm not allowed to do that, which I don't know has ever been true. But
You're always meant to state whether or not you have a conflict of interest.
yeah, so that means if someone's paying you or if your partner works for a product supplier and you always recommend to them, which is a bit
Yeah.
different, right?
Yeah, well, my understanding is you providing a product schedule when you submit a project is not a conflict of interest. You're just crediting the materials and suppliers who are part
Don't
of your
think
work.
it's I don't think it's even a conflict of interest for you to say why you chose a product and why you like it. Because
No,
this is what we've been
yeah.
saying over the last couple of weeks, that you have done the research to choose a particular product, and there's a reason you've done that. Not many people are sitting there considering 10 different products and figuring out all of the pros and cons and the use case and all of that stuff to come down to a specific product. You don't even need to endorse the brand or anything like that. You can just go, "Oh my god, these bricks, we couldn't find them anywhere else, and they're the most amazing brick that we've ever seen."
Well, we've got a design meeting at Bowerbird later today just talking about that concept of how architects could talk about the products or just explain why they've chosen a product for their project because of that loop. Because we
Mhm.
know that people want to talk about these things, so there's a lot of value there. So probably also have a lot of people out there screaming at us going, "But I still hate exclusives." And we hear you. We understand that. There's that tension. So I think it's about choosing the right strategy for the right architect. So if you were a small architect, you've got one project and you had it photographed, you spent all your budget on it. You really need work coming through the door tomorrow or the next day, not in 5 years. You're really fresh. What do you do?
I it is a double-edged sword. Like, this is a really hard thing to say what you should do. Like, but again, assess the value of the audience. So I'm not going to say, like, my instinct is, oh my god, get that project out there as quickly as possible. But if there is a huge amount of value in that, I would assess how long it was. So if you've got an exclusive for 8 weeks with a print publication, and they're saying, hey, we want to put you on the cover. Hey, doesn't happen very often, but hey, that might be something you want to consider. If someone's saying 18 months and we can guarantee you, half a page of coverage, I'd probably go, that's probably locking my content down for too long. I think what this makes you think of, perhaps a little bit crass, but I think when it comes to exclusivity policies for publications and practices on the other side, I think they're kind of like assholes. Everyone's got one. So they're all different, they're all complex. And so what that means is you have room to negotiate. You have room. And I've spoken to countless editors who have a lot of sympathy for that exact use case where they're like, well, of course you need to promote your business. You know, the print publications are not there to go, we're God and we get to make the calls. They're sitting there going, oh yeah, your first project is amazing. Your first full project, it's fantastic. We want it in the magazine. If you as the architect say, look, we just can't keep it tied up for that long. You know what the discussion's going to move to? Okay, well, can you give us this set of images? So can you make sure that you don't publish these 5 images anywhere else? And that then becomes exclusive content. Or there could be some movement around, like you were saying before. You can go into these publications, just don't go near our competitors. And honestly, most of the conversations I've had with editors around exclusives center on that. They're like, we just want to make sure that our advertisers don't feel like something has been oversaturated, but also the audience, not just the advertisers, the audience. We want to make sure that the content is protected for them.
Well, some publishers will give you a list of competitors that you can't share your work with if you're under an exclusive. And sometimes that's not that crazy.
I'm just gonna do a pause because this light is shining
Yeah,
in
you're,
our
you're looking so good, Ben.
success.
Yay! So coming back, what I would say is I think through that, because what we're talking about is the starving architect who is frantically trying to get the next project, and they're hoping that getting published widely is going to get them more work. That is an interesting question of whether or not that's how it really works anyway. If I was to step back and say, let's say you do have enough work to survive for the next 12 months, so you can actually be relaxed and actually do the best strategy, what I would say is take the exclusive, list as many products in that exclusive as you can, go down that route. Behind the scenes, I would go and talk to as many of my product suppliers and explain that you've got an exclusive coming out in a magazine, build those relationships behind the scenes because that could lead you directly to clients who are coming to look at furniture or lighting, these other places. Then what I would do is once the exclusive is finished, I would go out online, obviously jump on a Bowerbird. I would blast that out to the world, to as many online publications as I can, put it on my Instagram. But then I would take the next step, which is I would be trying to connect with those users using retargeting ads or emailing lists or something on the back end, because that's exactly what all the product suppliers are doing. That was the insight from the last couple of weeks too, which is that's where the sale comes from, the Google ads or the social media. Everything else is the audience which interacts with you. And then you need to do something with it. And I think almost everybody forgets that last bit.
And I think the really interesting thing, one of the really interesting things that came out of that from talking to the product suppliers who are advertising in these publications is you might think, oh, it's a product. So if you have an online ad, someone clicks through and buys, but they're almost exactly the same as architects. These are the furniture and lighting and things that we're talking about are really significant investments for a lot of people. There's almost no one who's clicking through and just going buy, add to cart, except for very small items. And so I think the idea of, oh, well, architects can't do that because online advertising doesn't work. Well, they're doing exactly the same thing. It is brand building. It is getting the follow. It's getting someone signing up to a mailing list, all of those classic sort of e-marketing things. And jump onto LinkedIn, you can sort of, you'll trip over all the number of people who can help you with those sort of marketing strategies. But yeah, ultimately it's like, I think what you're saying there is there's not just one channel and it's not just one opportunity. And if you put everything, all of your eggs in, I need to be in print or, I don't need to be in print, whatever it is, then you're missing all of the other things that you can do while you're waiting for an exclusive to complete.
Yeah. And something we haven't explored in too much detail yet is the value of somebody else's brand being attached to yours or connected. So the reason those product suppliers want to be in a print magazine, which isn't going to directly lead to sales, is because having that stamp, that big name actually means a lot because it's somebody else validating what you do. So especially if you're young, if you've got a new practice, you have no credibility. You don't really exist in the world. Even if you've got a beautiful project, it's very different to a known name, which everybody knows about, talks about. They're being elevated. So, your potential clients have heard about you and had some sort of reference from, again, other clients, product suppliers, all these people, all the word of mouth stuff that you don't have. That's what print magazine really gives you. Same as awards as well. The initial stamp of approval to say this firm actually does good stuff.
The blue tick, verified. Verified award-winning architect.
Now, we did get some other feedback from journalists and editors. So from the print side as well, they feel often that they're getting played by people for the exclusive slot. And I'll read out a comment here, which was, I get lots of, we've already sent it to XX here, but if not, you can have it. So essentially saying you're second best. And another one was, let me know because I have other magazines that want it. Now, everybody knows this makes sense. You are shopping around for an exclusive, but there's something about the psychology here which makes the magazine feel second tier when they're trying to secure high tier content. It's probably something about how you approach the exclusive as well.
Yeah, so you're seeing it as a commodity that you can shop around. I think that's a really healthy way to look at it because that essentially is what it is. I think what's happening there is sort of saying the quiet bit out loud. Like a lot of editors understand that you've probably pitched that to someone else and they've said no, unless you're the publication at the moment, you will end up in that situation. Just you don't say the quiet bit out loud. I'm sending this to you've already sent it to someone else and they've said no. And so you can go back to that other editor and say, no worries, I'm going to share this more widely so you won't have access to it anymore. And then say, hey, I'm sharing this with you for an exclusive, right? If that editor or writer then says, great, I want it, I would be really super honest and say, I just want to let you know I did send it to this publication first. So after they've already agreed to it, I did send it to this publication first. They declined. I just wanted to let you know that, they downloaded the images, whatever it may be. But I think what this highlights is because there's so many different rules and so many different policies, a lot of people don't know the rules and they actually end up breaking the rules inadvertently. I think there may be a very small percentage of people who do it on purpose. They will hide the fact that something has been published somewhere, like on one website or something. We had some other feedback from another freelance writer who, as a freelance writer, every pitch is worth money to you, right? That's how you make your money. If you're submitting as a freelance writer, if you're submitting or pitching a project to an editor and you're saying this is an exclusive because the architect or designer has told me that it hasn't been published anywhere, and then the editor of that publication Googles it and all of a sudden a new article pops up, that's really embarrassing to that freelance writer. You are damaging relationships, right? So just be really clear when someone says, has this been published before? Just be honest. There's no way to cheat it. You're just going to end up in this position where no one really wants to publish you anymore. So communication is key. Clarity is key. Ask for the requirements. If you're not sure what their a particular publication's exclusivity requirements are, ask so you don't make a mistake.
This is something that we're trying to grapple with within Bowerbird too, which is there's all these different rules. And this happens in all sorts of places where everybody obviously makes up their own rules of how they deal with exclusives. And that's really confusing when you're dealing with lots of different entities. So, for example, now with the exclusive tool on Bowerbird, being able to say this is the date of when the exclusive will last until, and we're going to lock that kit and prevent other people from downloading during that period. What we're trying to do there is say, you both know what the game is. So the publication knows what the game is. So that time limit will run out. You know that you've got to use that content before that period. But at the same time, you're not having to rely on the architect to be good in the sense of not sharing their content because it's just part of the system. When both sides know what the rules are, I think it works better. And maybe that's where some of that tension comes from, where people feel like they're being played.
The other thing is to have some sort of system and strategy around how you share content. If you're at a practice and you've got two directors and you're both interacting with the media, you're going to run into problems because one of you is going to say, "Oh, sure, have the images," and then the other one is in negotiation with a print publication for an exclusive. So have a system Again, bowerbirds are a really great way to do that. But even without bowerbird, it's like make sure one person in your office is responsible for dealing with the media so that you don't end up with this situation where it's like, oh, I didn't know this had happened. The other thing to be really super aware of when you're asking publications what their exclusivity arrangements are that have been shared on Instagram, I would hope that most publications are okay with you sharing it on your own Instagram account. Do awards count if you've been published as part of an awards roundup or an awards showcase? If you're a winner, does that count? Like, just be really clear what is and isn't being published.
Because once things are out on the web, they flow. So if you're going to play the exclusive game, make sure you're respecting that and not putting yourself in a position where you can make silly mistakes. Like suddenly something is out into the world and you didn't mean that website on the other side of the world to publish your content. They didn't ask you and suddenly it's popped up and it's moving and roaming around.
But again, this is where controlling your content, having a strategy, having a system in place to control all of that you're not sort of sharing too widely. I think that's really important. But yeah, I think that's a perfect example. You'll be in an awards program, they'll publish all of the images because that's what they do. And then there's some website in the other side of the world that's just grabbing that content and republishing it. I think most print publications would understand that those publications might not be the highest quality publications, probably don't have a great audience, so they might not be too worried about it. But you want to be really honest and open. So apart from anything else, Google your own projects to see if they're showing up anywhere. Because then when a writer or an editor says, is this an exclusive? You can just be honest and say, this random website published us, but that's all. We haven't given it to anyone else.
That was, and we're back after some technical difficulties.
Whoa. That's what we should do, just like landing on a new planet.
So, Amy, we're finally up to the bit where we answer your questions. We
know
deliberately.
that you listen to every single second.
So we had to put it right at the end. We're just trying to stretch out our YouTube video watch hours. We may have answered some of these already, but let's go through these.
Sounds good.
Okay. Do you wait until the project is finished before pitching, especially if a project is 6 to 12 months ahead in their editorial schedule?
That's a fascinating thing that's actually come up in the last couple of weeks for us. So it depends on the publication, but there are publications out there, one that already do their own photo shoots. So knowing about a project before you've sort of got a stylist in there, for example, might be really valuable to them because they can place product in the shoots and things like that. Again, that's a very commercial view, but it's the way things work. And then you've got things like video where someone is planning a shoot, months in advance. So knowing a project is there, even if all you're sharing is like happy snaps from an iPhone, that can be really useful. Newsworthy content where it's like, actually, when there's a opening of a big public architecture example, then you want to know about that beforehand. So I think there's a lot of value in building those relationships before you get photos taken, essentially.
Yeah, I think of it now as print publications have a stable of go-to architects. So they've chosen a handful of people who match their audience, match their advertisers, and they really like the quality of the photos. And sometimes it's just an aesthetic sort of match. So really, you're not really just getting an exclusive through a single submission. I think it's really a longer term game. But I think being able to talk to people early and maintaining that relationship, it's just a different game to the online world. So potentially yes, and like you said, letting them know so that they can create content along the way.
Yeah,
So
the nuance there is if you have an existing relationship. So if you have essentially, if you've already proven yourself and the quality of the projects that you produce, it's a much easier decision for the journalist. If you have a brand new practice with your first project, it's probably going to be harder to build the relationship off the back of that project that hasn't been photographed yet.
And it's probably fair to also say that you may have relationships with multiple publications because you are unlikely to get published more than, let's say, once every year. So they've got to have enough space to be able to spread you out. But if you are playing that game of exclusives, you could probably do it on multiple publications and you're building up the status to actually lift you up into that game. Okay, second question. If it's published as an exclusive, can they still share it to socials or on their website? We kind of have covered this, but
It's going to be, you've got to ask. You will not know. I know that there are publications out there who require the global and complete exclusive, which means it cannot be anywhere online, including your own website, including Instagram. Now, only a publication with a very high status, with a very large audience, would probably be able to command that, but there are a few of those, and they command it, and they also adhere to it quite strongly. You're talking about a small number of publications, not a lot.
Yeah, and the reality there is with print, it's never really about the audience size anymore. It's about the audience quality or the
Mm.
status of that print publication that you joining the two brands together, your brand and their brand, that's where you're getting the real value. So that's why it's not just about exclusives. You still need to be going out online afterwards. Otherwise, you're kind of you're really cool. You've got high status, but nobody knows about you. That's what the online world gives you. Okay, next question. What makes a worthy exclusive project? For example, is it about the imagery, the end product, or the story, or all of the above?
All of the above.
Yeah.
That one was kind of that was a leading question, Amy, but a lot of them are. Yeah, it's usually all of the above. We've always spoken about this idea of unique versus sexy. I think we've talked about this in a previous episode. So if a project is unique and it's sexy, sexy is a bit of a random word nowadays. If it's a beautiful project and it's unique, then it's probably going to be more appropriate for an exclusive. But if something is just unique, then it might have value. If something is just really, really beautiful, a really beautiful example, but not particularly unique, it's probably still going to attract a lot of attention.
Yeah, and something we've picked up on with print publications is the way they curate their projects and content is a bit like an architect does with materials. So you imagine the material palette you might have with tiles, carpet, timber, all of these things, they all need to match. So they're really, especially some of the most beautiful magazines, it's a very particular style. And so you need to match that. So if you don't match it, it's not the right publication for you.
I think what's fascinating is for anyone who hasn't walked into a magazine office before, is they will always have the current issue up on a pin board in exactly the same way that an architectural designer might have an inspiration board pinned up. So they're literally looking at the entire layout of the publication on a wall, and most of that stuff hasn't moved digital either. They're printing out these pages, and you are able to see the whole thing. So they are literally looking at the whole publication in its entirety to make sure that it has either it's all very aesthetically aligned, or it has a story that it's telling. So again, a lot of work goes into publications.
I agree. Walking to those offices, it was like a little creative studio. It's not a big architectural firm. It's not like there's 300 people there. It's five people. Somebody is there, maybe editing video. Somebody else has all of the pinups on the wall. Yeah, it's a much better way of thinking of publications.
Yeah, yeah.
Just a side tip there. I think the easiest way to build these relationships with publishers is to ask them, how can I help you? As an architect, if you have that mindset, rather than going all the frustrations and I really want to be in this, or just think of it as, how do I help you? What do you need? Is this a good match? Trying to have the honest conversation, because if you can do that, then you can figure out how you can potentially get into future editions. Last question from Amy. What types of publications, print, digital, newspaper, etc., are considered a conflict of interest? Well, similar to what you.
Again, different publications, different requirements. One of the most common refrains that I've heard from editors, particularly when you are talking about smaller practices who don't have a lot of projects, where they're starting to negotiate what counts as an exclusive, it will come down to their audience. So, who are the people reading it? Is it a very broad national audience like a newspaper? Or is it a very niche audience, so a magazine or a publication that is exactly like theirs? It'll be the audience and then also the advertisers. So I've heard of examples where a project will be featured in a newspaper that's a national newspaper, and it's been spread out everywhere, but they only used a couple of images to go along with something that was very much a story about real estate, for example, or in their real estate section. that may not be a conflict at all for a niche architecture print publication. So again, how long is a piece
Depends.
of string, or everyone has their own policy. It's not going to be set in stone.
Yeah, and those stories can be so different between newspaper and magazines. They they're chalk and cheese. They're just the audience is completely different. I would also say in a similar way, video could be very different as well. So a project may have been published quite a lot, but nobody has done a video yet. So it may be, and I think the video content naturally is more like an exclusive because the publication is often creating it. So it doesn't get shared in the same way. It's starting off with that publication, even if it's embedded somewhere else.
Well, I think this is always the interesting thing, and this is sort of our view in the early days around exclusives, that a project should jump into all these different publications, all these different places, and you want that to go, it'd be great if you could go online, video, then back to print. I think video and print are probably the two where I see this separation, where you could have an exclusive, potentially an exclusive in video and an exclusive in print, and they actually complement each other because the content is fundamentally different. Video is just so different to a magazine article that you can do both potentially with different publications, and that content stands on its own and it's distributed to different networks. Even just thinking about the people who are on YouTube, very different often to the people who are picking up, Architectural Digest potentially. I just think that there's a YouTube, generally a younger crowd, those audiences could be very distinct. So absolutely, I think there's lots of opportunities across different media.
Yeah, and probably as a final thought would be for architects to really consider the audience of publications when you're doing an exclusive. An example might be if you are doing small projects, let's say Never Too Small, as a video publication may be a perfect match for you. If you are doing a particular location, like with your clientele, but also you're just trying to get the match, like the right age, the right style of architecture, because that's when that's going to become really valuable for you. Otherwise, you may have something really cool, but it's pulling in the wrong sort of, I guess, people knocking on your door.
Something we've been talking about a lot internally, and probably is a lot of our psychology as founders of a tech company, is having an abundance mindset completely changes a lot of this stuff. So if you go, I can only be in one publication, and they're demanding an exclusive, which again, we've been over this, is actually a good thing potentially. If you go, hang on, I've got lots of publications here, I've got lots of print opportunities, and then after that, I've got like thousands of online opportunities, you're going to probably take these decisions, or it's going to be a little bit easier to understand and say yes to something like an exclusive, or say no to something like an exclusive if you need to as well. I think often there's this sense of we've got this small piece of the pie that everyone's fighting over. And the reality of publishing at the moment, I mean, we spoke this week to at least two new print publications. So there is new opportunities launching all of the time. You don't have to feel like you're all fighting over a tiny piece of the pie. Like, let's help the publishers to grow their businesses and support them.
Yeah, so many of the publishers I would say are really micro publishers in the world that we work in. So rather than mainstream media, let's say a newspaper, where they're having to find topics anybody can read, like real estate stories, they are really honing in on a very particular niche. So you're trying to find that publication which matches you and maybe where you want to go as well. So maybe not just where you are, but aspirationally where you
Where
would
you want
like
to
to
be.
be,
Yeah.
which is not a bad way of thinking about it too, because then you can think about what do I need to do to be in that workspace and what do I need to create to be able to be in that magazine. Once you understand that flow, all of that is a lot easier rather than it feeling like you're pushing against the water. Instead of understand, work with the publishers, figure out what they need, see if that aligns with what you have and what you can do. Guess what? Suddenly that just works.
Yep. A rising tide lifts all boats,
Yeah.
as they say. Yep.
Very good.
Great.
So thank you everybody who sent us messages on LinkedIn. You can find Ben G. Morgan and Nick Granlease on LinkedIn. We love these conversations. We try to keep them discreet if you don't want to share these stories publicly. But all of your comments are what allows us to do these videos and us not sound really boring and scripted, because we're riffing off what you're telling us and giving it a much more global perspective around these topics. So please jump on LinkedIn and share this and let us know your thoughts.
And give us new ideas as well.
Yes, thank you, Amy, for helping us get this script or this started and the snowball all sort of happening. Okay,
Awesome.
thanks everyone.
See you next week.
Bye.